All righty. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another live stream. I know this is not at our regular time, but as I've mentioned before, we're starting to add some other interviews outside of our regular broadcast schedule as we draw closer to the election. So thanks for tuning in at these sort of random intervals. Joining me today is Richie McGinniss, a very special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, you might remember in Kenosha, Wisconsin, when the events unfolded there, one reporter was heaped with praise after he was feet away from Kyle Rittenhouse when he first opened fire. That reporter is, of course, Richie McGinniss, who's with us now. Richie, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, during this interview, we're just going to sort of walk through what happened in Kenosha, what you saw, what your experiences were, what the timeline was. Of course, nobody can pass an accurate judgment on the innocence or guilt of any involved party, so we're going to stay away from that as much as we can. But just tell me from the beginning, how did you arrive in Kenosha?
Yeah, Shelby Talcott, who is my colleague, we've been traveling to a lot of these protest zones. And basically I run the video program at the Daily Caller. Our goal is to really tell the complete story of these protest zones. And as you well know, the media coverage has been biased on one side or the other, portraying either the better sides or the worst sides of things, both on the law enforcement and the protester side. So when we go, we really just want to interview all parties involved. We want to interview protesters. We want to interview people who might have worse intentions, rioter types, also law enforcement, also residents in the community, people who are there the next day trying to clean up. So we're really just trying to provide a complete and objective picture of what's going on in these zones without any of the kind of partisan narratives attached. And so when we saw things happening in Kenosha on that first night, Shelby contacted me and we basically just jumped on a flight to go straight there because we basically saw this, all of the kind of same elements that existed in Portland. You have a courthouse. In this case, it was a county courthouse rather than a federal courthouse, but you have a courthouse which becomes kind of the object of the protests. And then you have law enforcement defending that courthouse and you have protesters kind of putting it under siege. And so we went with the intention of covering that courthouse and the events surrounding it. And what turned out happening was actually significantly worse than what happened in Portland, than what we witnessed in our time in Portland. And that was a byproduct, I think, of not only the fact that there were a lot more large structure fires and stuff like that, but also the fact that this is a much smaller city than Portland. And the degree to which the law enforcement was prepared to deal with that kind of situation, I think it was very different from Portland, Seattle, New York, Washington, D.C., and all the other places where we've been. And I think that's part of the reason why, there was the chaos that we witnessed. And I don't think that's no dig to the law enforcement in Kenosha. I think that's more just a byproduct of the fact that they're not well versed in dealing with riots and protests of this magnitude. And I think what we witnessed there, well, obviously you can just make the assessment for yourself, but I definitely turned out to be more violent than what we saw while we were in Portland.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was kind of surprised at first that such a small town erupted into such violence. Did you feel like there was sort of the standard mix of protesters and counter-protesters there, or did you feel like the composition of the crowd was different than that we've seen in other areas?
It's hard to say exactly what the composition of that crowd was. I will say that whenever we go to these zones, there's two distinctive groups. There are people out there who are protesting with the best of intentions, have every intention of being peaceful. But then there are the folks who, there's kind of a changing of the guard that usually happens later in the evening. And the people who are more bent on chaos and destruction, they start to take control of the situation. And as things descend into chaos, more of those individuals come out of the woodwork. So as for the composition, I would say in Portland, what you have is a group of people who have been coming out there for, at the time that we were there, 60, 70, 80 consecutive nights, and now we're all the way up past 100. So I think in Portland, there is a very core group of individuals who are very well versed on how to antagonize police and how to draw them out and how specifically, to escalate the situation to kind of serve their needs of creating not only destruction, but also causing law enforcement, eliciting a reaction. So in Kenosha, it seemed like the protesters themselves were much less well prepared for that kind of situation. You didn't see nearly as many shields. You didn't see as many leaf blowers. You didn't see very many gas masks, which in Portland, that's like the norm. So I think what happened was, riot control dispersed the protesters, and then everybody just kind of scattered into the surrounding neighborhoods. And that's where we saw a lot of the structure fires lit and a lot of the really long-lasting destruction in Kenosha.
So you mentioned this changing of the guard process, and that's something that I think has been observed in a lot of different cities where the peaceful protest gives way to the more violent riotous activity. Where in that spectrum of peaceful time to violent time did you first encounter Kyle Rittenhouse? Because I know that you interviewed him, before any shots were fired.
It was approximately actually 15 minutes before the shooting that I interviewed him, and that was the first moment that I had ever encountered him. What actually happened was protesters were cleared from in front of the courthouse, and then they were cleared from the park surrounding the courthouse area. And where Kyle Rittenhouse was actually just across the street from the car dealership that was burned out on that first night. I mean, everybody saw the footage of those cars on fire. And actually, we arrived on the second night of protests. And on that night, we saw that same car dealership burned, but also the one that Kyle was standing in front of. We saw some employees of that business on the second night of protest, the first night we were there, which was the night before the shooting. We saw some folks with power washers trying to combat the fires on the cars in that lot. And so protesters had just basically been cleared from the street in that area, and Kyle and some other armed individuals were standing in front of it. And so when I came across them, it immediately was of interest to me because I had seen that exact same building with individuals trying to put out a fire the night before. So my first question was, why are you guys here now? What happened previously? And I basically just walked up to them and said, is anybody willing to do an interview? And Kyle was just the most willing. And obviously that's the kind of situation where you have 5, 6 guys armed with some heavy weaponry. Most of them looked like they had AR-15 style rifles, and a couple of them were standing up on the rooftop in the darkness. So it was a menacing situation. So my goal was just to get my interview and be as non-threatening as possible and get out of there. So when Kyle volunteered himself, I just wanted to go with the path of least resistance. And he actually refused to give his name, but he did agree to do the interview. And what you see on video is exactly what transpired immediately after I encountered him for the first time.
Sure. And at any point in your coverage of the situation in Kenosha, did you feel like Kyle was part of a group that knew each other, or were these armed individuals just sort of people from the area that had come together by happenstance?
I can't really speak on whether or not the other members of the group knew each other. In the interview, what he did say is that those other individuals were there to protect him when he was providing medical aid, because he did mention that he was a trained EMT. And the other thing that I can say definitively is that at the conclusion of that interview, one of the individuals who told me that he was ex-military, ex-infantry, he said that he was going to proceed with Kyle into the area where protesters had just been cleared to determine if anybody needed any kind of medical assistance. So they were both walking together and they were both conversing, and based on what Kyle said previously, it was clear that at least there was some kind of affiliation between him and that one other individual you can see in my video.
Sure, absolutely. So you said you first made contact with Rittenhouse about 15 minutes before shots were fired. I've seen conflicting reports about, Kyle shot first or there were other gunshots first. What did you experience when the gunfire first erupted?
What I experienced was, number one, I think it's important to note that I had some serious tunnel vision at the time, because that was basically, I was running after Rosenbaum, who was running after Rittenhouse. And
Rosenbaum is the guy who was wearing the red shirt and then later had the red shirt tied around his head.
Correct. And I had never encountered Rosenbaum, but what I did see was a man emerge and start to advance at Kyle, and me knowing that Kyle was well armed, once he turned and ran, I pursued them, just knowing that this situation was probably going to escalate. And at that time, I had kind of my journalism hat on, but the moment that it became clear that Rosenbaum was pursuing him, aggressively, it switched to more of a, okay, this is a very hairy situation. How do I stay safe? And how do I make sure that if somebody gets hurt here, like, what do I do? And you can see in the video, I'm pretty close behind. And that's right at the instance where it's a pop. And it sounds to be, I can't infer whether or not it was a gunshot. At the time, my thought was it could have been tear gas, it could have been a flashbang, it could have been a firework, and it could have been a gunshot. But what I can say definitively is that that pop goes off, and then Kyle turns around immediately after that. And at that point is when, basically Kyle starts shooting the first shot. So there was some loud pop just immediately prior. And then actually there's a lot of pops immediately after as well. So based on if you watch the video, it's actually a bit confusing to determine who's shooting when. But what I encountered was a pop, Kyle turned around, and then he shot, my night of testimony, I said 3 or 4 times, but after reviewing the video, it sounds like 4 shots that Kyle fired, and then there's subsequent shots from elsewhere after that.
And how long was Rosenbaum pursuing Rittenhouse, and where did that chase begin?
It wasn't pursuing him very long at all. Okay. It just was a matter of seconds from the moment that they started yelling and he started pursuing him to when those shots were fired. What happened for me was I was actually on the phone with my colleague Shelby Talcott because I had interviewed Kyle earlier and I saw him running down the street I was interviewing some other individuals. I was trying to get their side of the story because I had seen them kind of shout something at Kyle and I wanted to hear why they were mad at him. So I saw Kyle running down the street with a fire extinguisher in one hand and his gun in the other. And that being a pretty conspicuous situation, I mean, I just noticed that there were a lot of other people he was drawing their attention. I immediately called Shelby to find out where she was, with the anticipation that perhaps things were going to escalate. And I just wanted to make sure that we were together if a dangerous situation arose. And that's actually, I was on the phone with her at the moment that Rosenbaum started to advance towards Kyle. And you can see on the video that Kyle kind of gives a little stutter step and then he runs in the opposite direction away from Rosenbaum. Mm-hmm. And it's a matter of, I mean, you can see on the video, I won't speculate exactly how much time, but it's just a matter of seconds. He runs away initially, they get into the parking lot and you hear the pop, Rittenhouse turns around and instantaneously after he turns around, that's when the shots were fired.
And you're referencing the video that was captured by Shelby, correct?
There are multiple videos.
Sure.
Drew Hernandez and Shelby both have 2 different angles. I believe that the one that I'm referring to where it's most clear is Drew Hernandez's angle, because that's just, it's a more steady angle and you can hear more audibly what's going on.
Sure. So what happened after the shots are fired, immediately afterwards?
Immediately afterwards, there's still pops coming from elsewhere. And what I experienced, again, I had some tunnel vision at the time, was I saw Rittenhouse run away from the scene. And me being so close to Rosenbaum and Rittenhouse at the time the shots were fired, and them being so close to each other when those shots were fired, I knew that Rosenbaum had just sustained wounds that were undoubtedly extremely life-threatening. And so maybe the exact moment that it happened, I was in disbelief. I can't believe this just happened. But immediately after that, my only thought was I need to get over there and I need to do all I can to provide aid and get this guy to a hospital. So I had tunnel vision. There were definitely pops going off, but I just ran over to his body and he fell down on his face. So I was prepared to roll him over to try to examine what the damage was. And at that time, you can see in the video, but I didn't realize this until after the fact, I'm bent over Rosenbaum preparing to address his wounds and see if there's anything that I can do whatsoever. And actually that's when Rittenhouse runs back around the car and up behind me. And so I just saw a pair of legs arrive next to me as I'm looking in this direction. And I just shouted, call 911. And I saw that individual reach into their pocket. and pull out a phone. And so my assumption was, okay, that's done. They're calling 911. I didn't realize that it was the original shooter, Rittenhouse.
Right.
So I actually, and then immediately after he called, like he reaches into his pocket, I stand up and just, because it seemed to me that I had enough safety at that point to get my shirt off and start to try to, stop any bleeding. And so actually I get up and I turn, and Rittenhouse is standing right there. And I'm just so focused on pulling my shirt off and getting my neck gaiter off, and I actually had a helmet that I removed, that I didn't even see him. Right. It didn't even register that he was right there next to me. And if you look in the video, I'm actually kind of looking down. And then I just turned back, and that's when Rittenhouse runs away. And everybody can see in the video what happened after that. I don't have to really tell you guys. You can see it.
Yeah, of course. Which direction was he running? Did he run back towards the dealership or towards the police line, or where did
he ran back in that direction?
Okay, yeah.
As to why, I have no clue.
Sure.
But he did go in the direction where he had just come from, where everybody had just come from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then obviously everyone has seen the video of what happens next. You were with Rosenbaum, and I'm pretty sure I saw footage of you and a group of other individuals carrying Rosenbaum away from where that shooting occurred. You took him to the hospital then, I presume?
Yeah, somebody within 30, 40 seconds of the shooting, everyone started to arrive around, and you can hear it's a very chaotic situation. Mm-hmm. And somebody shouts, "There's a hospital across the street." And so the moment that I heard that, my only goal, knowing how life-threatening those wounds were, my only goal was just to get him to the emergency room, because in my estimation, there was nothing we could do as a bunch of amateurs on the street, and it was also a very dangerous situation. We weren't going to get anything accomplished there. So that's when I instructed one other individual to put Rosenbaum's left arm around his shoulder. I took his right arm. Another person held onto the shirt, and we ran him across the street as quickly as he could. And actually, there was some employee of the hospital saw us running across the street. He had an SUV, right? The hospital was literally across the street, but there was kind of a long hill that you had to go down to get into the emergency room. So he said, "Load him into the back of the SUV. It'll be faster to do that." And that's when they popped the tailgate. And actually, as I was loading him in, actually one individual, I have no idea why, I felt something, I thought I was getting bumped or something. And then I felt a really stiff punch to the side of my face, and I realized that somebody was punching me.
Why?
And, I have no clue, but actually you can see in Ford Fisher's angle, which is a third angle of the shooting, he didn't really get the shooting, but he got a lot of the aftermath. He's right there at the SUV. You can see him get pushed out of the way, and you can just barely see the individual going up to the back of the SUV. As to why he did it, I don't know, but what I can say is that there were a lot of people who were very angry and who were looking for, whoever did it. They were looking for anybody who they could associate with who did it. And I don't know why. Yeah, I can't say why, but I just know I got punched in the head.
Of course. So a lot of people have seen the videos of the drama and of the shooting and all these things, but I feel like a lot of people, myself and our viewers included, don't understand the mechanics of what happens next. So what do you do after you witness something like that? Rosenbaum's in the hospital now. Do you return and keep covering the protest? Or are you giving statements to the police? What happens?
Actually, I took Rosenbaum into the ER, into the waiting room, and that's where we loaded him onto a gurney.
Okay.
And that was the last that I saw him. And just a couple of minutes after that, I'm shirtless, I'm covered in blood. I did go into the bathroom to try to wash some of the blood off. And right after I came back out, an individual came in with a massive wound on their arm. And that actually was one of the victims of the second round of shooting. So I didn't hear any of those shots. I had no clue that was taking place. But after he came through, there were a number of police officers with him. They said, "Oh, we have another shooting." I just couldn't believe that, the wound that was on his arm was caused by a firearm. But immediately after that, they locked down the hospital. And so I was actually safe in there because they were not allowing anybody in or out. And that's when I, just decided to get my bearings and figure out what the safest way to proceed was, because as demonstrated by the chaos outside just prior, I knew that the situation out there was extremely dangerous, especially for someone shirtless and covered in blood.
Yeah, absolutely not a good set of equipment to have when you're out in a riot like that.
Mhm.
So in the aftermath of this, you've been doing media appearances, you've continued to report on riots. How are you keeping it all up, and what's your plan with the Daily Caller moving forward for continued coverage?
Well, my goal was to do just enough media appearances to get the word out to not only just like one side of the public, but the whole public.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to do a variety of outlets, because obviously, I don't think it's any stretch to say that we do have two distinctly different echo chambers in America right now.
Mm-hmm.
And my only goal was to provide the most objective account that I can of what I saw, given the amount of speculation that I saw on the internet about, oh, well, what if this happened? What if that happened? Well, I was right there and I saw it with my eyes.
Yeah.
And so my goal was just to give the account of what I saw, what I heard from Rittenhouse immediately prior. I will say that me being a witness in this situation, that there are certain risks involved with making those appearances, but I'm confident in what I saw, what I heard, and in recounting that accurately. So I'm just trying to do as much as I have to do to inform the American public, or just the public in general, of what I saw. And moving forward, I think that we're seeing a ratcheting up of political violence across the country. And our video team's goal since the beginning was to provide objective on the ground account. Not so much that we're trying to report objectively, more so we're trying to show what's happening through both the scenes that we're filming and also the individuals that we're interviewing who are telling us why they're there and what they think of the situation. So our goal moving forward is to continue to provide that kind of coverage. And if anything, this whole situation and my relationship with it has just revealed to me further how much, the two different sides are trying to use this violence to advance some kind of agenda. And that's been very concerning for me. And it does reinvigorate me in terms of wanting to continue to serve the role that we do in the public discourse, our video team specifically, just because I think that we're doing the best job of going to these zones and just telling the story, the various parts of the story as objectively as we can.
I completely agree. The Daily Caller has been doing a fantastic job. Last question I have for you. Are there any facts or things that you've witnessed that you feel are grossly misrepresented in the media, whether those be in Portland or in DC or in Kenosha, that you'd sort of like to set straight over here?
I think that it's not necessarily that the media is acting in bad faith by not telling the full story here. It's more that they're not present for the instances that we are. So you have, for example, a New York Times reporter who was in Kenosha who decided it was too dangerous and went home. Clearly that was a good instinct. I don't blame them for leaving because it was a dangerous situation. But for them to act as if the situations that we're capturing between the hours of 12 a.m. and 6 a.m. aren't even taking place, I think that is an issue. And the problem is that these legacy outlets, they view the independent journalists and folks on our video team as somehow lesser, and therefore, our coverage isn't worthy of their attention. And I think in the instance of Kenosha, there were no legacy outlets there at the time that all this took place. And if it weren't for our video team, folks like Elijah Schaefer, Drew Hernandez, Ford Fisher, BG on the Scene, these independent journalists and digital outlets are the only ones who had any coverage of the actual event itself. So in our absence, this would have just been, would have been up to the corporate and legacy media to determine what happened and who's guilty and why. And so I think that I don't fault those outlets for not being there, but I think that there is a problem when they ignore the accounts and the video and what the people who were actually there witnessed. So in the aftermath of Kenosha, I think now that the facts are starting to become clear, things are changing a little bit in terms of the broader media is paying attention to kind of the more objective account of what happened. But in that first week, I just watched as, you know, one side or the other speculated with no real concern for example, what I had to say about what objectively I witnessed. Their concern was only which side of the narrative can we fuel based on what we're able to gather up right now. So I think there was less of a fact-finding mission going on and more of a knee-jerk, you know, how can we use this to serve our partisan / you know, media agenda. And for me, that's been the most eye-opening experience. And like I said previously, I think that only makes our role in this landscape leading up to the election that much more important to continue to try our best to just show this as objectively as we can.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think that choosing not to show up to a situation as violent as Kenosha or Minneapolis or DC, probably a good choice for some people, but to pretend like the images that exactly. But to pretend like the images that you've been reporting and the things you're describing don't even exist is criminally negligent. I'm with you there. Richie, thank you so much for coming onto our live stream. I know you're a very busy guy. The Daily Caller has been doing excellent work. Where can our viewers find your work and continue to follow you as you continue reporting?
So at Richie McGinniss, that's on everything, RichieMcGinniss. So it's 2 S's actually. A lot of people have been getting that wrong lately. Yeah. And you can actually go to youtube.com/dailycaller. You can also go to dailycaller.com. And I also just want to commend all the other folks who are on the video team, both on the ground and behind the scenes. You know, they've been incredibly brave over the last couple of months. And I think that, you know, the work that they're doing is very important for the public and for this country as we head into this election. So I just want to commend them as well. And you also for obviously the work that you do.
Absolutely. Well, Richie, thanks so much for being with us. Everyone check out the Daily Caller, follow Richie McGinniss with 2 S's on Twitter, and check back for more live streams in the future. Richie, thank you.
Thank you.